Hey everybody, this is Matthew Soltesiak, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast, part of the Minute Media Podcast Network. This season, it's all grit. I speak with a variety of guests and interview key players, gaining more insight on what makes this team go. The Detroit Lions are now in a new, grittier era, and we look beyond just the kneecaps when it comes to the analysis. Welcome to another episode. The NFL owners' meetings are underway, so in this episode, we discuss a plethora of news coming out of there about the team, the facilities, and rule change proposals. Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, and Rod Wood each gave insights to these different areas. We'll break it down, plus touch on more roster additions and talk a little something about Ford Field. Let's get to it, Lions fans.
Hey everyone, this is Lomas Brown, and you're listening to Not the Same Old Lions podcast.
Joining me today is Coach Jerry Angers. He's former Michigan High School Coach of the Year. He was also named Coach of the Week by the Detroit Lions. He's also the Scouting and Training Director for Bull Rush Sports. Coach, good to have you here.
Great to be here. My favorite team's out of the March Madness, so it's time to talk Lions football again.
All right, well, joining both of us to talk Lions football is the Sports Writer of the Year for Community Newspaper Holdings Incorporated. That is James Cook, the senior sports writer for the Traverse City Record Eagle. James, Coach and I are happy to have you here.
Yeah, good to be here. I'm just trying to fit some stuff in before spring sports start crushing me.
Yeah, it's going to be a wacky season, especially with the cold start to the season. So you'll be, busy with a condensed schedule, I'm sure. All right, folks. Well, as we get to this, I want to reference a previous episode, which was an interview with Theo Riddick. If you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend you go do that. He talked about his NFL draft experience, as well as some of his experiences playing for the Detroit Lions. So check that out. That was our last episode 184. And also, we are on social media. You can find us on Twitter, a.k.a. X. We're on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube and a few other platforms as well. Okay. Let's talk about player movement, folks. And the first one's going to hit hard, and it's going to hit hard for Coach. And it's defensive lineman John Kaminsky announcing his retirement officially. He says injuries took a toll. After 6 years in the NFL, he's medically retiring. Coach, we're going to let you start with this one, man, because we know this was your favorite player for the last couple of years for the Lions. So what's your reaction to this?
Yeah, it kind of started last year when he got hurt for the season, and I'm like, man, are we never going to see this guy again? Because, the roster kept building up. He's the commish. The guy did everything they asked for. Lunch pail, hard hat, go to work every day, play D-line, play DN, 100% motor running, and I'm not, how many times did I talk about it? I just love the guy. Just because of that. He's a Division II football player that made it. He got to the 6-year mark. Of course, he didn't play this last year, but yeah, he's going to be missed. Dan Campbell had a great quote on him and said this: "He is what we are." He is what we are, and he was in there, from basically from the beginning, and he meant a lot to Dan Campbell. You could tell because Dan started talking in circles on him because he didn't know. He wanted to make sure he covered about how important he was to the turnaround of the Detroit Lions. Gonna miss you, Commish.
All right, James, you want to weigh in on that at all, following up on Coach's comments?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned this before, but I thought he kind of was the Dan Skipper of the defense, where he's that guy who just came and worked hard every day, played his way onto the team. The Lions gave him a second chance after the Falcons dumped him. They claimed him off of waivers, a pretty early move by Brad Holmes in his tenure, and just became kind of a staple of that defense and the defensive line rotation. So pretty much just what Coach is saying. I mean, he was one of those guys that was just kind of the grit, I think, of the defensive line. So and added a lot of things to that team in the locker room too, and everybody around the team seemed to love him.
Yeah, he found a role immediately when he got here, and he was an immediate improvement to the roster at the time. And again, it's tough seeing those injuries take a role and shorten his career. But greatly appreciated what he brought to this team, with this club, and wish him well moving forward. Well, the Lions did announce that they've added another player since our last episode, and that is guard Coyote Awashika. And again, a guy who hasn't seen a lot of playing time in a starting role, mostly in a fill-in role, But I love this move, James. Just the depth it brings with the experience we've seen out of him, because when he has played in that limited time, we've kind of liked the results.
Yeah, he's nice, solid depth, at a pretty reasonable price too, which is something that you kind of have to have in the NFL this time of year, with the cap and everything. Is you got to have some of those affordable depth pieces to give you some of that depth, but not break the salary cap. And Awashika does that exactly. Whenever they've put him in, he's done pretty well. He can play both guard spots, and has been it's a nice, solid player for them for the last few years.
Coach, your thoughts on Awashika and what he brings to stability of the offensive line and his importance bringing him back? Is this important?
Yeah, it's huge. James said the same thing too. He's a depth piece, but he's been in the system. He knows what's needed. They know what's needed of him. He knows, maybe he went out and tested. He wasn't a free agent. Maybe he tested it and saw, oh my God, there's not a whole lot of people gonna, pay for him. But the Detroit Lions are, again, they're excited about their roster right now, even though they got changes to make. And this is just another added piece that, like we said, was it 2 years ago? He played, at the end of the year, I think it was a couple games for Jackson, and he held his own, did a good job, and so he's gonna keep continue to get better, and gives us more depth and more guys on the roster that need to stay on the roster.
Yeah, and Coach, you talked about that familiarity with the system lowers the learning curve, which decreases the chance of making a mistake in a critical moment because you've already got that muscle memory built in. And again, there's going to be changes on the offensive and defensive side of the ball with the new coordinators and whatnot, but I'm sure a lot is going to be similar. And so it's a solid move. It's just one more piece for a guy that you consider to be a decent depth piece. And yeah. All right, another guy making news is Khalif Raymond. He was already under contract, but the news is he took a pay cut. He does a restructure of his contract as well, and that eliminates a 2026 cap hit, James. So that's not nothing. It's something, right?
Yeah, it kind of plays into the Lions cap situation is the bigger thing here. Raymond's getting his money. So the Lions aren't really, I don't think they're paying him less money. They're just kind of moving it around in many ways.
Oh, okay.
Because in 2026, I mean, he does take a pay cut, I think, in his guaranteed salary for next year or something, but it's mostly just kind of moving money around in the restructure because in 2026, all those extensions that they signed, like Sewell and Aleem McNeil and Amon-Ra St. Brown, are going to start hitting the books. And the Lions cap situation in 2026 right now is that they have almost no space left. I think it's like 5 or 6 million maybe is what they have left as of right now without re-signing anybody for next year. That's why they got all those 1 year contracts. So they're trying to free up some cap space for next year, because they're going to have even more guys that are going to re-sign extensions this year. So I'm guessing they moved all of that money from 2026 up to 2025 so that they can use some of that cap space that they have this year to eat into that money. And then, even if the cap goes up 15 or 20 million, the Lions are looking at maybe having, 20, 25 million, and Holmes likes to have 20 million on hand during the season. So they would be almost, handicapped under the cap and not be able to sign hardly anybody.
Yeah, and then they carried over money into this year from last year's cap. And so I expect, based on, and we'll talk about what Holmes dropped later, is that they're going to probably try to carry something into next year as well to try and help with that. Coach, I guess this is just one more example of a player liking where he's at, willing to adjust, I guess, to help the team out, but knowing that it's worth the adjustment versus going somewhere else.
Oh yeah, for sure. And again, that piece that knows the system, knows everything, knows we know what we get from him, and he knows what's expected of him. So it's just another great piece that the more you can hang on. We talked about it 3, 4, 5 shows ago, whatever, about the percentage on how many we hang on to, and he didn't want to test the waters. He wanted to stay home in Detroit. So welcome back.
Yeah, and sometimes it's a two-way street, right? That rewarding the team that took the chance on you when maybe others weren't giving you that opportunity, and then finding that fit. Another guy finding a new fit is wide receiver Josh Reynolds, former Detroit Lions wide receiver, reuniting with Aaron Glenn over the New York Jets. So you got a little Detroit to Detroit connection there. But let's stay on the wide receiver thing. Jamison Williams' name came up at the owners' meeting. Brad Holmes talked about it. They said they're likely going to do a fifth-year extension on him. They have, I think, 3 or 4 weeks left or something like that before the decision has to be made on that fifth-year option. Sounds like the Lions are going to do that. They did ask Brad Holmes about doing an extension for J-Mo, and I thought his response was kind of interesting. He talked about it's going to be expensive to extend him, or just looking at what the wide receivers are making these days. And so he was a little bit elusive on that, James. Did you see that? What do you read into that? What are your thoughts on the fifth year? Seems like a no-brainer at this point, but what are your thoughts on this situation?
Yeah, I think that, they'll sign him to that extension. The fifth-year contract is, like I said, not going to be cheap. I think for the wide receivers for that class, it's like 15 million or something, upwards of that. And we're seeing the big name wide receivers this year in contracts getting around 20 or more. I mean, bigger ones if your name is Jamar Chase, obviously. But big name wide receivers are now going for 20 million a season. So they could sign him to an extension. I think that and we talked about the 2026 cap and how that's going to hit. So they're going to have to fit that $15 million into there in 26. They probably can move a lot around with restructuring Jared Goff's contract because it was kind of built to be able to be restructured and move some money around. So I think they can. 2026 is kind of a bottleneck in the Lions salary cap, and then it kind of gets better a little bit after that. So if they can move some of the stuff out of that bottleneck, and that's what they were doing with Cleve Raymond, they'll probably do that with Jared Goff here fairly soon, to move some of that money down the road a little bit with Goff and create some room to re-sign some of these guys starting in 2026.
Yeah, I mean, drafting as well as they have, it creates this whole situation where you have a lot of really talented players you want to keep home, coach. And, we know the mantra for the Lions. You want to reward the guys that are here, that are doing the job versus just bringing guys in all the time. What's your take on J-Mo here, though, coach? I mean, we've seen him up and down a little bit. I know you and I and James have all been a big fan of him, and we've been rooting for him, and we're behind him. But some people are like, well, should they pick up that fifth-year option? To me, it seems like a no-brainer. You pick that thing up. The guy, after last year, seems to be ascending. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree, but I think you got to put two together. I mean, when you're going to start putting that kind of money out on these guys, they want 2 or 3 seasons together again. And he's had some bumps in the road, and that could take a factor too on where those bumps are going to be. If he didn't have those bumps in the road, then we'd probably be talking about his contract extension, or how they're gonna probably end up trying to have to let him go because he's going to cost so much money. But so I think that's the biggest thing. It saves them money. Right now they don't have to extend them, but we can do that at any time. They can do that at any time, and if some things get cleared up and they can figure it out, they're going to try to keep them. So yeah, we want to keep them. I mean, we're not the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't know where they get enough money to pay 2 receivers what they paid them, but that's what it's looking like for J-Mo.
Well, yeah, like you said, by adding that fifth-year option, it means they have 2 more years of him to look at before they have to actually make a final decision on that. James, your thoughts? You had something else you want to add on J-Mo?
Yeah, I think the Lions really like Jamison Williams. I mean, obviously there's been some hiccups and some bumps in the road, but I kind of liken it to. I think that kind of he is the Dennis Rodman of the Pistons, and Dan Campbell is kind of his Chuck Daly. And we saw what happened when Rodman went away from having that kind of person in his life that kind of helped him stay a little bit straight there. So I think for his own good, I think, being around the Lions is good. And I think that Dan Campbell kind of wants to keep an eye out on this kid and really, really likes him and wants to make sure that he succeeds and thrives.
All right. Well, I'm excited to see what he's going to do this year on the field. A lot of expectations. Brad Holmes even mentioned, I think it was Brad, it might have been Dan Campbell, one of them, said they think there's another step in him yet. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye on. Another thing to keep an eye on is that defensive end position, Zadarius Smith. All right. He was brought up. Brad Holmes talked about it and said, ultimately, he was too expensive. I mean, that's the thing. It was just too expensive to keep him. And a lot of Lions fans are bummed. I am too, because I thought if you put him with Marcus Davenport on the end over there, I'd feel pretty good going into the season opposite Hutch. But he said they're still in touch. And so Coach, optimistic, hopeful. What are your thoughts on Zadarius Smith here? And is there a chance for a reunion, or is it kind of more of a long shot?
Well, I that they're still talking to him. I'm sure he's still, he's still shopping. His agent's still shopping, trying to get him a better deal. Yeah, he'd be a great ad here because then that puts Levi down inside, to help cover McNeil. I mean, and they talked about they want Levi down inside on that. So, and Sedarius, even though he's 32, going to be 33, or maybe just turned 33, something like that, he's still got some juice in the tank. And if we can pick him up for a Levi contract, then let's do that. So, and I think that's what's happening, and I believe they still want him back too, but it's got to be the right fit for both parties, and it's a business right now, and he is getting up there in age to where he wants to make as much money as he possibly can. So, but I love the comment that they made about the DN spot. I think Brad Holmes, somebody asked him and said, "You guys heard it? Hey, name six great edge rushers in the league." How many are there? And the guy says, "Oh, there's no 6 or 7 are great." Okay, how many are on the same team? They're not, and that's the thing that was Zadarius Smith. He's one of those guys that could give us some solid minutes. So to be continued. I'm sure the draft is going to determine what happens from there.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? He said, "All right, we've got Hutch. You're not going to get another guy like Hutch. Like it's a luxury to even have Hutch."
Mhm.
James, I don't expect Zadarius Smith to make a decision before the NFL draft because you don't want to go and sign with somebody like Kirk Cousins did last year, and then suddenly the whole situation changes on you, especially at this point in Smith's career. He probably wants to know how the table's set before he figures out which table he's going to go eat at.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be probably pretty wise on his part. I mean, if it's gone this far, I think you might as well take it through the draft. And I think Brad Holmes even joked during one of the press conferences or one of the interviews he did about, that I'd like to add 3 or 4 edge rushers. Talking about I'm assuming just during the draft, but Zadarius Smith could be one of those guys.
Yeah.
I think he would be a great rotational piece for them at defensive end.
Mhm.
I think at 33, maybe his time of being a full-time guy is coming maybe towards an end. And we saw him be really good those first 3 or 4 games with the Lions and then tail off a little bit because he had to play so much because they had so many injuries. So I think that they're seeing him more as we bring you in, we have you, we have Pascal, we have Davenport. If you 3 guys can hold down the other side opposite Hutch and me, and we probably draft somebody else, we'll be good at defensive end.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would feel great if they got him back somehow because just that boost of him on that side with Davenport, knowing you got 2 guys of that caliber rotating through, plus you've got Pascal if you need him out there or whatnot to rotate around. But to be determined, and I'm sure as we'll talk about towards the draft that's probably a position they might consider looking at there. But staying on the free agency thing, Brad Holmes did talk about that, and I loved his analogy because he said they had to be very mindful in the money they spent. Because they're going to be spending a lot of money next year. And we already talked about the money they spent this offseason, actually back during the season when they did those extensions to McNeil and some of the other players. He basically said, you can't take a family vacation this summer because there's things you got to buy. And so you got to save up for those things. And 16 million was like the max they could get like on a defensive back. And they couldn't believe they got DJ Reed at that price and they got that quality of a player at that price. So that was a luxury. They talked about Levi Onwuzurike at that price. They got some great pieces to their puzzle. And so it's one of those things where he talked about wanting to build the team to win now, but also in the future, James. And sometimes I guess you get that instant gratification urge, right? You want the 3 cookies right now, but you need to run a race first, and maybe you should wait and not eat those cookies and train for that race and eat the cookies after the race. I just came up with that metaphor on my own. It might not be perfect, but we want to win right now. But at what cost? Because we know there's so many variables once you get to the postseason. So your thoughts, are you trusting Brad Holmes' process, or is he off a little bit on this?
Oh, Brad Holmes hasn't been wrong yet, aside from maybe Trinity Benson, and some other little moves. But so I'll go right along with what Brad Holmes is saying. They need to stay the course. They want to be a contender every year, not just one year. So I think that's part of the reason why they're holding the line on Zadarius Smith and saying, here, this is probably what we can pay you. If you can go somewhere else and find that, great. Obviously, it hasn't yet.
Mhm.
So, I think that the chance of him coming back is still pretty realistic, and the chance that they draft somebody in the first 3 rounds at one of the defensive line positions is pretty likely at this point. I think defensive line, offensive line, both in play. I mean, they've got to start restocking those positions if they lose guys. And
Yeah.
eventually they're going to start losing guys because they won't be able to pay them all. So you've got to start backfilling with talent in the draft behind them.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, Levi's back on a 1-year contract, so you don't know what that's going to look like next year and what it could cost next year, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, I fully expect them to be replenishing those. Those two positions are probably some of the most likely ones a lot of fans and pundits are picking the Lions to draft at.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's a very deep draft this year on the defensive end and defensive tackle are both loaded in this draft, where you can get guys that are contributors well into the draft. And even rotational defensive tackles on day 3.
Yeah, well, and then you said both sides. On the offensive side, the Lions have not brought back. Well, they didn't bring back Zeitler. He went and signed with Tennessee, but they have not brought in a veteran on the offensive line. And I believe it's Brad Holmes said he's optimistic about Christian Mahogany, but he also said they've seen a little bit of him, but it's a small amount. And he said he would not rule out bringing in another veteran coach. And I know that's something that we all would like, just so you have another guy with some experience in there and you're not putting too much on a guy who you're counting on, because we know how important that offensive line is. And they're obviously going to probably look in the draft as well on this. But what are your thoughts on the offensive line, Coach? How vital is it for them to either bring somebody in or draft, or is there something else possibly in the works?
Well, I think there's 18 different things. Let's go back to the Levi thing, which is going to lead on the offensive line thing because of the D line thing, and then Zadarius thing. Okay, how's that? So if the Lions get the defensive end they're looking for, Zadarius may not be brought back. If they can't get that defense lineman or the guy that's on the board that they're looking at, because Brad Holmes, he's going to draft what's best available for him, what's best for the team. Doesn't by position, they don't care. They're not going to say we have to have a DN here when they're probably saying, well, if we don't get a DN here, we can still bring Zadarius back. That's my gut feeling. That there's also a few plug and play offensive linemen in there right now that can possibly be brought in. Some of these guys in the draft, because some people have said that the Lions are going to draft. Hey, we took Sewell, right, and it wasn't a backfire, so they may look at a tackle concept or somebody to back up or that guard spot. Manu, right? Is that his name? Manu.
Giovanni Manu. Yeah.
Yeah, I showed you guys. I sent you guys a video of him working out at that offensive line camp. The guy's a monster, and now rumor is they may look at him as a guard spot. He was a project, and then you think, oh my God, a guy that big playing guard. Becton from the Eagles, who was just traded or who just signed elsewhere, was also one of those tackles that didn't pan out as tackle, but they put him in at guard, and look at the year he had, and now look at his payday. So you start looking at those different things. I think we do need a veteran in there. But again, we already talked about a free agent signee that we had earlier in the show, and who is basically a veteran, even though he doesn't have a lot of playing time. He still knows the system. So I think you start balancing all those different things, and I think the draft is going to determine what they're going to do. If one of those offensive linemen falls to 28, and we don't have to trade up to get, and then we see a D lineman that's going to fall down into that second round, they may do that. So every year we're interested to see who they're going to draft and how they're going to draft. But this year, I think, is really big on the puzzle pieces to where what they're going to do with the rest of the free agency.
Yeah, I mean, 2 years ago, we pretty sure they were going defensive back with that number 6 overall pick, and suddenly they walked out with a linebacker and a running back in the first round, and a tight end in the second round, and we're like, how did this all happen? So you're right. Depending on the way that draft board falls, and when you're drafting, much later in that round, a lot can happen, and you're right. That definitely would impact other guys they might bring in, depending who else is available. Another guy they brought in was defensive back Avante Maddox, and Brad Holmes talked about his versatility. James and Coach, I want to hear your thoughts. The way he said it, he said the guy could play safety as well. I mean, Is this a chance this guy might have some Ifeatu Melifonwu type role in him, or is he a little bit different than that? I'm not as familiar with his game, James.
Yeah, well, the way he was used quite a bit last season with the Eagles was as a safety, just because they were so deep at corner, that they were like, well, we got to use this guy. So they used him quite a bit as safety, even though he's a natural corner. He is a kind of a decent sized corner and a good tackler, so it was a pretty natural thing for him to do. So that's kind of the role I see him being is kind of a I don't know about necessarily specifically Melifonwu, but a safety who can play all over.
All right, and
You
again,
know,
having safety depth is important. We got those two top guys, but we don't have much depth behind them.
yeah, exactly. The guys behind them are all young, undrafted free agent types that are developmental guys. And then you got the two stars at safety. So I think he slides in right between those and is your third safety to start the season next year. And then you can see if one of those three developmental guys pops, or maybe if you get somebody in the draft or another undrafted free agent that comes in and suddenly takes the number 4 job or something. But I think this is a pretty good stopgap. And he's a Detroit native. Dude has a Detroit Lions tattoo, that he's had his whole life. So, and guy like loved Darius Slay growing up as a kid. He would DM Darius Slay for advice, and everything. So, he guy lives and breathes Detroit. So I think it's a good fit overall.
Yeah, that sounds good, Coach. I got to believe you're liking this guy.
Oh, for sure. Again, that's that those people, and as much as they move around, AG moved guys around a lot more last year, and I think Shepard's going to do the same thing, plug and piece in certain situations. He's a box guy. He can play corner. They can, Meek can move inside, and Meek can be that outside corner. We already got the outside corner in Reed. Now we got two safeties. We could bring Branch down in. I mean, the pieces are all starting to come together, and again, another guy who's got a lot of experience in a winning program, and he's coming home. So welcome.
Nice. All right. Well, let's pivot over to rule changes because at the owners' meeting they've been talking about a lot of those. Coach, get us started with one James and I were talking about a lot in a previous episode.
Well, I got the touchback rule, and we talked about that a little bit. But touchback rule, if it's a touchback, it's going to be brought out to the 35-yard line, which is, we had kind of talked about during the season. 33% returns last year. This, they say, should jump it to between 60 and 70%. So
Coach,
again,
do you like this?
I love it. I love it. And I think that's us fitting those pieces in. We have to start working on those crazy kicks so that they land in the spot, and try to force it. Again, we talked about, you're going to need probably two returners back there now, two threats, and two guys that you're going to have to worry about. So I think that, we had kind of touched that base, but it's going to be fun to open that up a little bit and see what happens with it.
James, I mean, this cuts down that automatic kick it out of the end zone because that extra 5 yards, I guess, is kind of that tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it puts most teams like a couple of first downs from a field goal, essentially. So you're going to see a lot less. You're going to see a lot less of teams just kicking it out of the end zone, and I think you're going to see a lot more kickoff returns. It's one of the more exciting plays in sports. It was great before they had to take it out they had good reason to do it. But they're finding ways now to get it back into the game. I think you're seeing the Lions. I think the Lions kind of knew this was coming, and they were in this free agency. They re-signed a lot of backup linebackers to play on special teams. Maddox also plays special teams a lot over his career for the Eagles. So they've been really getting backups on this defense that know how to play special teams.
Yeah, I mean, the kickoff thing now has a year under its belt. So teams are going to have a full year of film to go back and look at, Coach, and adjust. I mean, you can say they had preseason and stuff, but nobody was showing their true colors in preseason. So I guess I'm thinking from your perspective, there's a lot of room to grow that we're going to see this year in the kickoffs compared to a year ago.
Oh, there's no doubt. And I think they're gonna have to put more. The return teams, I think, were more prepared this year for it than the kickoff teams. I think because the kickoff teams, a lot of times they would just say, kick it out of the back of the end zone, kick it out of the back of the end zone, because they weren't set. Now they're going to have to scheme a little bit. because they're going to have to put it in play. And, it becomes another defensive possession, another defensive play, as a kickoff team. And you know how much I like defense. So I think it's gonna be great. And again, it's gonna bring some more excitement to the game with and defeat some of the injuries and not as bad injuries with the way they have it lined up. So I like to see them making some changes, not throwing something out, but making a tweak to it, which they think again should jump the return 60 just up to the 60 to 70% mark.
Nice. And speaking of tweaks, you talked about overtime. What do you got on that?
You guys are on that. You guys are all over that. I was like, keep it the same, but I don't want to do this. So I think you and James can explain the new overtime rule a lot better than I can.
James, did you look that up? Because I am not aware of that one.
It's
Oh, it was just that it was different in the regular season than in the
Yes.
postseason.
Yeah. And
So
it's
Oh, and
gonna
now
be-
they've made it regular season where
Regular
both
season,
teams
yeah.
get possession, right? Is
Yeah.
that what it is?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
So, yeah, they made
Yeah,
it so both teams.
the playoff rules are now, that was what they wanted, the playoff
Yes.
rules to be in the regular season too, because it
Yeah.
used to be that they were different.
Okay. There you go. Smooth it out a little
I don't
bit,
know why
little
you would
tweak.
have them different anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and again, this one now it's if they both score, then it's the next one who scores. It's a done deal. So, 10 minutes, same thing. That's nothing changed on it, but and that's kind of what we talked about a couple shows ago. Where you guys had said that, and I had brought that up and said, whatever, with the coin toss thing, but still score 7 or lose.
So I guess those people who wanted the college football look aren't getting it yet, and might not ever. So, all right, well, we'll see how that tweet goes, but I like the consistency between regular season and playoffs, because why change the rules for the postseason? It gets a little confusing, I guess. Coach, what do you got to hear on a replay assist?
Oh, there's a new and I know everybody's going to be say yes, more replays. I love it. So if a flag is thrown, okay, the flag has to be thrown. If the flag is not thrown, they cannot overlook these plays. So they're looking at defenseless player hit. If there's a flag thrown, they can review it. Grabbing the face mask. If there's a flag thrown, then they can review it. I think that one is the one they want, because there's a lot of face masks. No, I shouldn't say a lot of face masks, but many face masks last year that weren't called because they weren't sure. Now they can throw it. And if it's, now they can review it to say it was not a face mask. The horse collar, which they said that we missed a ton of horse collar tackles last year, whatever, tripping and then running into the kicker. And again, the flag has to be thrown for them to ask for a replay. And if the
All right,
flag
so
is
you
not thrown,
can't
no.
you can't go ahead and say, hey, wait, you missed it. Go take a look. It's got to be if it's thrown. But as you said, Coach, that does give a little bit of leeway for the official to err on the side of, I'm pretty sure I saw this, versus trying to not do it in case they're wrong.
Yeah, because there was a couple big face masks in big games last year. Maybe I think there was one in the playoffs, and I think there was one against. I think there was one against Lions too. I don't remember exactly, but I remember going, "Wow, they missed that one." I don't remember which game it was, and now they're going to probably throw it and then say, "Let's go check it." And so again, it's more delay, but let's keep it safer and make sure we're making the right calls on critical situations.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't slow things down much, because I'm not a fan of slowing it down, but
Right.
I am a fan of getting it right, and that's the big thing there. James, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's much better to get it right. They can do these replay assists. Using the replay assist is not the referees themselves looking at it on the, going over to the sideline and having to look at it. It's the people up in the booth, I think, doing it. So it's a lot more time efficient than the referees having to go to the sideline and do their whole thing with looking at it in their little gig there and stuff. So I don't think it's going to be as big of a time suck kind of as much as people think. The replay assist stuff that was done last season was fairly quick.
Cool. Well, speaking with technology and assists like that, the NFL is going to switch to how they measure first downs. I think this is something that people have wondered why it didn't happen 5 years ago or 10. But they're going to use some camera-based technology for determining whether something's a first down or not. And they will, fear not, folks, have traditional chain crew still on the sideline in a secondary capacity, because we all know technology makes life easier when it works, but when that technology stops working, life is more difficult than before that technology existed, right? And so this way it will prevent some of that. Coach, you good with this?
Oh, I think so. I mean, if it's quicker technology, they say the first down's good, not come out with the chains. We've all been in the situation where the chains failed, and
Index card, right? Remember the index card? Yeah.
yeah, the index card, or I watched a referee roll a football to get to the chains instead of bringing the chains to the football one time. Not that I remember that. That was at Ford Field in 2016. It cost us first down against Jacksonville and Christie. But anyways, not that I remember anything. Anyways, and I think it's good. I think, like you said, the technology. I mean, we can put a little sensor in a hockey puck and know exactly where it is on the ice. So why can't we figure that out with the chains?
Yeah, makes sense. James, anything to add there?
Yeah, well, and it'll save time too. If you don't have to have the guys come walking out, and most of the time your chain gangs are older guys. So you got some guys in their 50s hauling this chain out there, and that takes a bunch of time. Now you're not going to have that. There's your time for replay assist.
There you go. It all works out like a nice little puzzle. Couple things that didn't fit into the puzzle were a couple of the things the Lions threw out. One was illegal contact rule change. It failed. They wanted to get rid of the automatic first down. Only 2 teams apparently voted for it: the Detroit Lions and the New York Jets, led by Aaron Glenn. So that was kind of funny that, AG did it as well. The reseeding suggestion, which we talked about, has actually been tabled to the May talks. And so they're going to rediscuss that in May. It hasn't totally been let go, but there's a lot of that goes into it that they're discussing. I mean, one is, if you win a division, you had to play, you play the first place schedule. So there's could be some toughness to winning your division versus, being the number 3 wild card or whatnot. And so lots to talk about there. And then the other thing was a tush push. That's been tabled to May as well, I believe. And James, anything you want to weigh in on any of those 3?
No, I think that those being tabled, it makes sense to move those kind of things, I think, back behind the draft, because I don't know that people are going to make any decisions in the draft based on those 2 rules. Whereas some of the other ones, maybe it makes a difference on a couple of players or 2 or something. A bunch of these are procedural and stuff like that, but I don't think anybody's going to be going out and drafting a guy because they think, oh, we can run the tush push with this guy.
I would agree with that. And yeah, the kickoff thing, that could affect the number of linebackers and tight ends people sign, because we've seen the Lions do that like crazy this offseason. Coach, this tush push thing, we've heard some others say they're against it. They want to get rid of it. Dan Campbell says, bring it. He goes, we play him this year. I want to stop it. He goes, we're not going to do it. We don't run that with Jared Goff, but he's not opposed to it. From a coaching standpoint, I mean, you're a coach, you've done this. A team found a way to be successful at something. I loved watching Washington try and stop it. I thought that was hilarious. What are your thoughts? I mean, we already talked about it. There doesn't seem to be an increased injury rate during this play. Do you think they should just allow them to keep doing it and make teams stop it, or do you think they should change it?
Well, the Eagles figured something out, let them run with it. It's not like it's cheating. It's just, hey, we got smart and we're going to do this, and we're going to make sure we're lower than you are at point of attack, and we're going to get the first down. And if it's 4th and 1, no matter where we're at, we're going to do it. So, then the other part of it is, that's like Dan Campbell said, if I'm a defense coach, I'm playing them right now. I'm Sheps right now in the D line room, and everybody probably once a week looking at a way to stop that thing, or looking at a way trying to stop that thing. So yeah, it's, bring it. Let's see if we can stop it. It's gonna hold. It's gonna hold. It's probably never going to be voted out until somebody gets hurt from it, whether it's because of that or something else. And then they're going to say, see, we told you so. I just hope there's no see, we told you so, because we don't want to see anybody get hurt. So let's leave it and stop it and make them not use it anymore, because we stopped them every time.
All right. Well, speaking on things Dan Campbell talked about, let's talk about our roster, because he mentioned his comment was, we played bad at the wrong time. We should be careful tweaking too many things. And this is where this offseason noise has grown, I think, from a lot of fans wanting them to get that second amazing defensive end, right? That most teams don't have two of. No teams seem to have two of. So, and Rod Wood brought it up too, right? They went 15-2 last year with 17 guys on IR, James, and their focus has been keeping their own guys. And so, isn't that kind of the calculus where you did well, and a couple things didn't go your way? It doesn't mean you blow the whole system up and you don't overcompensate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't broken, really. I mean, it was maybe sprained, a lot of sprains, but their system wasn't broken. They went 15-2 with that many players on injured reserve. Think of if they're a moderately healthy team this season, how good they're going to be. The Eagles got incredibly lucky as far as injuries go that last season, and they barely won the Super Bowl. So think of what the Lions, how good they would have been last year without half of those injuries. I mean,
Yeah.
that defense was still incredible with half of those injuries, well into the season. Eventually they just were too much and it took its toll, but they're going to get a bunch of those guys back. So I feel pretty good about this, just, getting the band back together.
Coach, I mean, you've run teams back multiple years over. Obviously, there's always adjustments. There's always new people that come in, and you're always improving. And we got different coordinators coming in here. But if I'm not mistaken, the Lions are bringing back like 20 of 22 starters, approximately, is what I'm going with here. I mean, that's a pretty solid number. What are your thoughts on the response from Dan Campbell on this?
I love it. And I think one of the things too is, and everybody forgets, you want to tweak each year to figure out what you need to do to get into the Super Bowl. Okay. And that's done within your own building. That's done at your practices and your coaches' meetings and your draft picks and stuff like that. We don't know what to tweak because we had lost 16 or 17 guys in certain situations. And so then you look at the overall picture, and you guys both mentioned it. We were 15-2, and Rod Wood mentioned they were 15-2 with all these injuries. So now let's say out of what they say 17 injuries. So let's just say 8 of those injuries come back and play up to their capability. We're going to be really good. And I think that's the thing. And then our depth pieces are going to be there. So yeah, it's nice to add, but again, we lost a corner, but we added a corner just as good and at less money. We brought back a defensive end that if he can play, in Davenport, if he can play, or if he lasts, he went 2 games and 4 games, but prior to that, he was playing 11 and 13. We're in good shape. We got Levi for 4.5. We're in good shape. I mean, and again, it all goes back to what James said about the 2026 calendar, or the
Salary cap,
because now, and these guys that we signed to 1 year, if they turn into it, now we can extend them to 3 or 4 and put that money to 2027. Great job, you guys. And so let's see what happens with it. And now we got a draft, and we, knock on wood, rarely miss on a draft pick. And so again, what do we have, 6, 7, you guys, is that right? And so, I agree with Dan Campbell. I think they're in great places, and they're going to put the pieces in to make them even that much better.
Well, and that's where that draft is so important, to continue to get new guys in there that are talented, that are cost effective as well. So James, talking about the roster change, but then also there's a couple other things that Campbell brought up. One was the wide receiver position. That he was asked about it. They got pretty darn lucky with the Tim Patrick thing falling in their lap late, because they've tried getting different guys in, going all the way back to your guy, Trinity Benson, right? I mean, I'm not saying he's your guy, but you brought him up earlier. I mean, they brought in, was it Denzel Mims? Was that the wide receiver they brought in? They've tried a lot of different guys to get in at that X position. And he said they'd like to get younger at wide receiver because, you got to continue to replenish that room. And so it wouldn't shock me to see them draft an X receiver in the first 3 rounds if there's a guy with some height there. So that is an addition I could see them making. I think we'll look more at that as we get closer to draft. But that's one thing he dropped. The other thing he dropped is they're not expecting Aleem McNeil back early. It's already been hinted at, but the way it sounded, I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if he's not back the first half of the season, because they said they want to make sure he's fully healthy and like his old self before they rush him in. So what are your thoughts on some of these things that Campbell dropped?
Yeah, I've been kind of running under the assumption that Aleem McNeil was going to miss 6 to 8 games just from the beginning of last season. I also assume that Malcolm Rodriguez will not be ready for the beginning of the season. So they're going to have to go a couple games without him. Just because, they both had ACL tears fairly late in the season. So they're not going to be ready for the beginning of the season, but they'll be nice additions later on to help the team. We know how good Aleem McNeil is. They may move Pascal, I think, inside a little bit more to try to replicate a little bit of what Aleem McNeil does, and then you've got Levi, kind of can do that role too, a bit. Not quite as good, obviously, but can do some of the similar things. Um, yeah, and just as far as the draft, I mean, if you go back and you think about that, and adding a wide receiver, I think makes total sense. But looking at his 4 years of drafting for Brad Holmes, how many guys has he missed on that weren't because of injuries?
Yeah, it's pretty astounding. We saw the graphic before on the difference, and it's pretty incredible. And I do expect them to address some of this in the draft. Coach, I think we've seen the Lions do everything they can with players to make sure they put them in the position to be healthy and to succeed. And so, we've seen it every year. They're not going to rush a player back. You got to feel good knowing that they're going to take care of Aleem the right way, even if it means you might have James said it could be 6 to 8 weeks. Like, it could be the first half of the season you're playing without him, but they want to make sure they're playing with him the end of the season.
Right. Oh, for sure. And I think that's one of the things too was the Levi thing too. I read, I remember at the beginning of last year, Danforth was talking about how well he's going to be as a D tackle concept, that they can move him inside, especially in pass rushing situations, and then bring a speed rusher, speed edge rusher, off ball edge rusher out there with him. So I think that's one of the big things, bring him in. So they've set themselves up that I'm not sure when Wingo's going to be back. We still have Broderick Martin. I mean, guys that are going to, and the competition and being competitive is going to be huge during camp. So I think that's the biggest thing. And excuse me, I read too that they were saying we have a overloaded defensive line roster. I think I read that somewhere, and I'm sure a lot of people are reading like, what are they talking about? We only got Hutch, but anyways, that's the thing. I think they're piecing those in there so that they can say, Aleem, we're gonna bring you back week 9, or we're gonna bring you back week 8, and get almost a full year of recovery under there, as well as Barnes and as well as Wingo, and who else had a late knee injury. I think that was it, right? Barnes, again, Barnes going to be ready at it. Yep. Again, so I think that's the thing they're doing. They're getting themselves ready for the injuries, because we're really good at replacing people when we got injuries, but we're going to be ahead of the game here, and then it should be good. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, that's the thing. We're bringing back so many players, but we do have some people coming back from injury that won't be ready right away. So that will affect part of our defense and potentially the offense, but I think just the defense as the things get started. Rod Wood had a lot to share. We already talked about, focus on keeping their own players. He talked about they've drafted so well they have to pay some of those players. Well, he was also asked about season ticket prices and the schedule. Dropped some really interesting information here, guys. He said if you looked at all 10 of the Lions games, 8 regular season and 2 preseason, their average secondhand price for a Detroit Lions ticket was $404. $404. And he said the second highest in the NFL was $270. That's a huge difference between the Lions and the second most. He said there's currently 20,000 people on the wait list, and they had a 98% renewal rate from this past year. Now, the Commanders game this past year was the most expensive NFL ticket non-Super Bowl game ever. And so it tells you what the demand is. I mean, you've seen what it's like to go to other stadiums. Heck, we've all done that, and the tickets are less expensive if you go to a different stadium. But asked about pricing, interesting enough, he said the prices aren't going to jump to that $400 level, but They are going to try to increase it to recognize what the market will carry, were his words. And he said the function of demand and ability at a price point that's fair relative to what other teams price them at, and they'll be well below the secondary market. Now, it's a complicated thing. He said he didn't get any complaints this past year, except from people who were ticket brokers. Now, I saw a few complaints on social media. Maybe not as many this year as last year, or maybe it was balanced. I'm not quite sure, James. What did you notice with the reaction?
Not too much. I mean, a lot of people obviously were not happy with the tickets going up, but like you said, that's a side effect of the Lions being in demand this year. When another thing I guess that's a side effect of that is the Lions, I guess, are one of the teams that's possibly going to be playing on Christmas Day this year. They said that was, quite a possibility that the Lions were going to be one of those three games. So, I mean, there's prices that come with suddenly being good.
Yeah, I mean that's the primetime games, right? I mean they're fun to watch, but I tell you, getting up that next day or traveling back from the stadium can be a little bit tough. And Rod Wood did say he's hoping to say, hey, we're playing on Thanksgiving. Can you not put us on Christmas? Because we got, our fan base doing both of those. Coach, what did you want to say on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's again, we've talked about it. I'd love to go to every game. I'd love to go to every away game, but I love them winning. So I can sit down in my basement with my leather helmet on and enjoy it, And I think that's what the biggest thing is. But do you want a winning program, a team that's gonna talk about Super Bowl or bust every year? How many times have we in our lifetime have we heard that 3 years in a row? Right, and we're at it, and there's still people. They're like the fourth favorite. Okay, well, we usually were the 32nd favorite or 31st favorite. So, yeah, it's they got to make their money, and that's the way it is. And God bless them that they're doing it, and it's not going to change, and there's no way it can change. So, root them on and just keep happy that they're going to be winning all the time. And now I just saw that. Is it 4 times a year we can wear the black jerseys, guys?
Yeah, there's a tweak to when you can use alternate jerseys and whatnot. And so, yeah, Coach, you're hoping to get 4 times out of those?
I'm gonna go buy 4 different ones and go to 4 home games then.
All right, we want pictures from each.
Yes.
I just want them to wear the Honolulu blue with the silver pants. I think they did that once last year, maybe twice, but that was it. Like they were like afraid of those or something because they lost one game wearing them, and I think that might have been the only time they wore them. But that I just love those, and maybe those we'll see those a little bit more than just the monochrome. Other interesting thing about tickets is in 2026, it's highly likely they'll be playing an international game. And Rod Wood did say he thinks one of their 9 home games could be overseas. Now, that was one of the nice things last year when they did raise those ticket prices so much was the Lions had an extra home game in the regular season. So that helps absorb that a little bit. Obviously, this year they only have 8 home games. And then next year, if they do that international game, that will bite into that. Sticking with the international theme, they've expanded their marketing rights to Brazil now. Now, they already had Germany and Canada. And Rod Wood said the auto industry connection with Germany kind of made a nice, perfect fit along with Amon-Ra St. Brown. And, St. Brown tells some camps over there. So I guess if they're going to have an international game, the 2 top options most people are probably thinking would be Germany or Brazil. I do not see myself traveling to either of those, although it would be a fun experience. Who knows what time they'll be on and whatnot, but that'll probably be – Coach, maybe I'll bring some of my gear over and you can put your helmet on and I'll come watch with you in your basement.
We can do that.
All right. James, that's another one of those prices, right? Prices for being successful is, Rod Wood would say, please don't put us on Monday nights on the West Coast anymore if you can avoid that. But it's one of those things. You're not playing Sunday at 1 o'clock all the time. There is that price for success, but I think like Coach, you're probably okay with these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, much rather be a 15-2 team and have to deal with, paying a little bit extra if you want to go to a game, or choosing not to and staying at home and watch with some friends, or go to a bar, sports bar, or whatever you wanted, however you prefer to watch the games or whatever. But I think if you had asked a bunch of Lions fans 10, 20 years ago if they'd be willing to spend a little bit more for the team to be good, they would have resoundingly said yes.
All right. Well, talking about spending money, the Lions are spending money on facilities. Allen Park, to be specific, they are doing more upgrades to it, including the weight room. They said it's more than 20 years old, but the plan is stay there for the foreseeable future. They put a lot of money into it. I think it was last summer as well. And they looked at other options, and just nothing else really is a viable option for them. They said that they're a little limited with where they're at as far as not being able to add a third outside field, but we've all been there. You know, it's a pretty solid facility. They've done some renovations to it. So it looks like Allen Park's going to be their home for that. And then Ford Field's name. They've agreed to extend the naming rights of Ford Field to 2036. I think all of us could say, no duh. I think it kind of seems like the most obvious response to that one. Like, what were you going to change it to, right? Like, what were the options? Obviously, they're separate entities, and a business person can tell you it had to be done. But, James, that puts them up to 2036. All just solid, no-brainer, good moves, right?
Yeah, I would think so. I think that the Allen Park thing, they probably maybe took to heart some of the things where they were kind of middling in a few of those things with the training facility, the players' responses in that survey that they do. That was some of the places where they were kind of in the middle of the NFL instead of in the top third. So put a little bit of money into those things, add a little bit more. The practice facilities are something that the players really appreciate, having a nice practice facility and just having some amenities there. So if you're looking to draw people in, that's the way to spend some good money.
Yeah, and coach, they're kind of limited with what they can do with Ford Field at this point. They've already done some major upgrades. This naming rights thing takes them, 11 more years into the future. Ford Field opened in 2002. About half the stadiums in the NFL are older than the Detroit Lions stadium. I don't know. Stadiums don't tend to last the way they used to. I don't know that I see them changing, because you wouldn't want to leave that location. It's perfect right down there, downtown, next to Comerica. So what are your thoughts on the naming rights and the future?
Well, I mean, you're right. It needs to stay down there. And Ford Motor Company is Detroit, and Ford's own it, and it should be named Ford. I think we just stay with it. I mean, it's kind of, and again, it's through 2036. Now the stadium's a little bit older, but we went last year, and I took some friends, and they hadn't been there before, and they're like, "Wow, this place is beautiful." So it's staying up there. It's not Jerry's World, but it's Ford's World, and we're more blue collar, lunch pail, put a helmet on, let's go play. Where Jerry World's got all the bling bling, so we'll stay with Ford Field.
Yeah, bling bling doesn't always win-win, though, does it?
No, it does not.
James, another cool news that came out about the Ford Field situation is in 2027, James and Coach, Ford Field's going to be hosting the Final Four. That'll be a fun little nod, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That should be a great one.
Yeah,
It'd be nice to just be able to go to that.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that'll be cool. Oh, and one other thing. You're going to have to catch the next episode, or whichever episode it is that drops. But I interviewed former Detroit Lions quarterback Mike McMahon, and he played at the Pontiac Silverdome, and he opened Ford Field. And one of the stories he shared with me was so wild. And so Ford Field changed everything for them, and having Allen Park there. And so, man, I mean, it's just going to blow your mind. Obviously, the whole NFL has changed in the last, 25 to 30 years. But, Ford Field's been a nice upgrade. Obviously, as it's gotten older, they've made a lot of upgrades to it, and hopefully they just continue to do that, because, I mean, I've sat in a lot of different seats in that stadium, guys, and I don't know if there's a bad seat in that house.
I've sat in the literal top row, and it is still a good view.
Yeah. Well, guys, we covered a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff came out of the owners' meeting. There were a few moves as well. James, anything else you want to hit on before we get out of here?
I just like the moves that they're making, especially on the defense. They're adding depth everywhere.
Mhm.
I was while you guys were talking, I was kind of looking at how many guys they got. They're 2, 3 deep everywhere. They're signing veterans like Maddox and Rocky Sin. I don't know if we've even talked about him yet or anybody. I mean,
Yeah.
that's another DB that's a veteran guy that they came in and added, and so they're just adding these kind of guys all over the place. It's another learning experience I think from last year, but it's definitely going to help.
Well, think about that going into the draft. How little needs, real needs. We could put a team on the field right now. I mean, last year, yeah, we traded for Carlton Davis, but we didn't have Rakestraw or Arnold. And think about, and I don't know if we had signed Amik Robertson at that point. I mean, we had to rebuild the secondary last year. So, yeah, I am going to agree with you on that. I'm really liking the moves we've made, and I'm excited for the draft. Coach, anything you want to hit on before we get out of here?
Nope, just looking forward to the draft day, that's for sure.
That's going to be here before we know it, before this month ends, actually, folks. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. Please tell your friends and family about the show. You can find us on most social media websites as well as most major streaming platforms as well. That does include YouTube. We'd love to hear your thoughts and reviews. Check out more episodes and content at notthesameoldlions.com. And until next time, stay gritty, my friends.